Lena sat at her desk in the quiet lobby of the office building, her eyes occasionally drifting to the clock on the wall. It was almost time for the end of another long day. The office was always bustling during business hours, filled with the sound of ringing phones, clicking keyboards, and the low hum of important conversations. But as soon as the clock struck 6, the energy shifted. People hurried out, eager to finish their tasks and get home. Lena, however, wasn't like the others. While most employees left for the evening, she stayed behind. As the receptionist at a well-known tech firm, she was used to the quiet that came after hours. Her job was simple enough: greet clients, answer calls, and keep things organized. But when the workday ended, she felt the loneliness of her post. It wasn't that she didn't like her job; it paid the bills and she had a steady routine. It was just that she didn't fit in with the rest of the team. The employees around her were all high-energy, ambitious people. They were driven, confident, and constantly working on their next big project. They talked about business trends and the latest tech innovations, their conversations often sounding like a different language to Lena. She wasn't one for small talk, and she rarely joined in. Most of her colleagues barely noticed her at all, except when they needed help with a phone call or had a quick question. She was just there, but Lena had a secret. While the people around her lived and breathed their work, Lena lived for something else entirely. When the office emptied out, when the phones stopped ringing and the desks grew quiet, she would slip away to the back of the building. There, hidden away in a small unused lounge, was a piano. It wasn't a grand concert piano or anything fancy. It was just an old, slightly out-of-tune piano, tucked away in a corner of the building. But to Lena, it was magic. She'd been playing piano since she was a little girl. Music was her escape, her way of expressing everything she couldn't say with words. She would spend hours at the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys, letting the music flow through her like a river. No one at work knew about this side of her. To them, she was just the quiet receptionist who always seemed a little lost in her thoughts. But at the piano, she felt free. The music gave her a voice, a place where she could express everything she kept locked inside. But Lena was shy. She had always been quiet, and as she got older, her confidence seemed to shrink even more. The thought of sharing her music with anyone made her nervous. She couldn't imagine playing in front of an audience, let alone someone from her office. The piano was her personal space, a world where she could be herself without fear of judgment. So, she kept it hidden. After finishing her work each evening, she would slip away to the lounge, closing the door behind her so no one would hear. She would sit at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched the cool keys. But as soon as the first note rang out, she would forget about everything. The pressures of the office, the stress of the day, and the loneliness she sometimes felt. All that mattered was the music. She often played for hours, letting her mind wander with the melodies. Sometimes she played classical pieces she had learned over the years. Other times she let her fingers find their own path, creating something new. Music was her way of coping with the challenges of life, a way of calming her nerves and finding peace. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifeline. But the building wasn't always empty after hours. Occasionally, a few late workers would still be in their offices, finishing up projects or catching up on emails. Lena had learned to be discreet. She didn't want anyone to know about her secret. It wasn't that she was ashamed of playing the piano. It was just that she couldn't bear the thought of someone hearing her and judging her. She had always been self-conscious about her playing. She was no professional, just someone who loved to play for the sheer joy of it. But even so, she couldn't shake the feeling that if someone heard her, they might laugh or think she wasn't good enough, and that thought terrified her. Most of the time, it was just her and the piano, the quiet of the room broken only by the soft sound of the keys. But on the rare occasion when someone passed by the lounge, Lena would stop immediately. She would quickly stand up, close the piano, and rush back to her desk, heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't ready to share this part of herself with anyone, not yet. But there was one person at the office who seemed to stand out from the rest. The CEO. He was different from the other employees. Unlike most of the team, he wasn't constantly rushing from one task to the next. Instead, he was always calm, composed, and focused. Mr. Hayes was the kind of person who seemed to have everything under control. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking, he was quiet like Lena. But there was something about him that was hard to ignore. Lena had only seen him a handful of times in passing. He didn't interact much with the staff unless he had to, and he certainly didn't come near the reception area. He had his own private office at the top of the building, where he would spend most of his time. But Lena had heard things. She had heard that Mr. Hayes was a genius in the tech world, someone who had turned the company into a powerhouse. People respected him and even feared him a little. He wasn't the type to linger by the front desk or chat with the receptionist. He was always on the move, always busy, so Lena never imagined that she would ever have a real conversation with him. She simply did her job and kept to herself, knowing her place in the company. But on this particular evening, something felt different. It was a Tuesday, and the office had cleared out as usual. The only sounds in the building were the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant clicking of keys from the few employees still working late. Lena, as always, stayed behind. She'd finished all her tasks, and now she was free to lose herself in her music. She headed for the lounge as the clock struck 6:30, eager to play. The piano was waiting for her, a familiar comfort in the quiet of the empty building. As she sat down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys, she took a deep breath and began to play. The soft, familiar chords filled the room, and for a few moments she let herself forget about everything else. But then, something unusual happened. Lena thought she heard footsteps. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. Could it be? No one else was supposed to be in the building. Her heart raced. She tried to shake off the feeling and continue playing, but the footsteps grew louder. Someone was definitely approaching, and then, without warning, the door to the lounge creaked open. Lena's heart skipped a beat when she heard the door creak open behind her. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Her fingers hovered over the keys, her breath catching in her throat. The footsteps that had been slowly getting louder were now right outside the door. Someone had entered the lounge. She turned her head slightly, trying to see who it was without fully looking. The figure was tall, with a confident presence that instantly made her nervous. As the door opened just a little wider, the person stepped inside and Lena's breath caught in her chest. It was him, Mr. Hayes, the CEO. Lena's hands immediately dropped from the piano keys and the soft sound of the music faded away. She felt a cold rush of panic wash over her. She hadn't been expecting anyone, especially not him. She had no idea why he was here, and now that he was, she had no idea what to do. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," Mr. Hayes said, his voice low but warm. He stood there in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression that was hard to read. "I heard the music and thought, well, I thought it sounded beautiful." Lena's mind raced. She couldn't speak. Her cheeks were hot with embarrassment. Of all the people to catch her playing, of all the nights when the building was empty, it had to be him. She quickly stood up from the piano, feeling awkward and clumsy. I didn't know anyone was still here," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his gaze never leaving her. "I didn't realize how late it had gotten either," he said, glancing at the clock on the wall. "I've been working on some things, but..." The music caught my attention. He paused, taking a step further into the room. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to let you know that it sounded incredible." Lena wasn't sure how to react. She had always admired Mr. Hayes from a distance. He was the kind of leader people respected but rarely spoke to. He was the CEO, after all, and Lena was just the receptionist. She had never expected their worlds to overlap. He had always seemed so distant, so focused on business that he barely even acknowledged the lower-level employees. But here he was, standing in front of her, offering an unexpected compliment. It was almost too much to process. "I'm sorry," she said, quickly smoothing her skirt and trying to regain some sense of composure. "I'm just a receptionist. I don't usually play around here." He shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're much more than that," he said. "I'm sure your colleagues would agree." Lena's chest tightened. She wasn't sure if that was a kind thing to say or if it was just polite conversation. She wasn't used to compliments, especially from someone like him. "Thank you," she mumbled, not sure if she was supposed to say more. There was a short pause. Lena stood there, unsure whether to continue talking or to just let the awkward silence hang in the air. Mr. Hayes seemed to sense her discomfort because, after a moment, he broke the silence again. "You're really talented," he said, his tone sincere. "I didn't expect that, to be honest. I've always thought music was something special, but hearing it like this, it's different." Lena's eyes flickered to the piano. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding her breath until now. I've been playing for a long time, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It's just something I do. For myself, mostly. He nodded slowly as if considering her words. I can tell. It's rare to hear someone play with that kind of emotion. Most people just play notes. But what you're doing, you're feeling it. It's powerful. Lena didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to people noticing the way she played or acknowledging it in such a personal way. She had always been afraid that people would judge her, think she wasn't good enough, or that her music wasn't worth listening to. But Mr. Hayes didn't seem to care about that at all. It was almost as if he was speaking from a deeper place, one that understood her love for the music. I never thought anyone would, hear me, she admitted, looking down at her hands. I mean, it's just a hobby. I'm not a professional, it helps me clear my head. His eyes softened and he took another small step into the room. I understand. Sometimes it's the simple things that help us the most. For a few moments the room fell into another silence, but this time, it wasn't awkward. It felt more like a quiet understanding between two people who didn't need to say much to communicate. Lena didn't feel so self-conscious anymore, though she still had a slight nervousness swirling in her chest. Finally, after a few more moments, Mr. Hayes spoke again. You know, he said thoughtfully, I've been in this building 100 times, but I've never heard the piano played like that. I'm glad I stayed late tonight. Lena wasn't sure if he was just being kind or if he truly meant it, but either way, she felt a tiny flicker of warmth inside her. She didn't feel as invisible anymore. For once someone had noticed her for something other than her job title, and it made her feel seen. I didn't know you liked music, she said, almost as if testing the waters. She had never thought of Mr. Hayes as someone who would appreciate something like this. He raised an eyebrow, looking a little surprised by the question. I do, he replied after a beat. Not many people know, but I used to play guitar when I was younger. Not as well as you, though, he added with a smile. Lena was shocked. She never would have imagined the CEO playing an instrument. It seemed like something so personal, so far removed from the image of a powerful business-focused leader. But it made sense in a way. After all, music was about emotion, and emotion was something everyone could relate to, no matter how far they were from each other in the workplace hierarchy. I never would have guessed, Lena said, her voice still tentative, but with a new sense of curiosity. Most people wouldn't, he said, shrugging slightly. It's not something I talk about much. But music has a way of bringing out sides of us we don't always show, doesn't it? Lena nodded slowly. Yeah, it's like it lets you say things without using words. Exactly, he said with a smile. I think that's why I find it so fascinating. They stood there for a while, a quiet understanding passing between them. Neither of them spoke for a few moments. It was a peaceful silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable or forced. Lena wasn't sure what was happening. She wasn't used to this kind of connection, especially not with someone like Mr. Hayes. Listen, Mr. Hayes said after a while, breaking the silence again. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I'd love to hear you play more sometime. It's really something special. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She was surprised by the request. You mean, you want me to play again? She asked, a little shocked. If you're comfortable with it, he said, giving her a warm smile. I just think your talent deserves to be shared. Lena's mind raced. She had never thought about sharing her music with anyone outside of her own little world. The idea of playing for someone else, especially someone so important, made her nervous. But there was something about Mr. Hayes that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, it wasn't such a bad idea. I'll think about it, she said finally, still feeling unsure but also oddly reassured by his kind words. He gave her a nod. No pressure. Just whenever you feel ready. With that, he turned and headed toward the door, leaving the room as quietly as he had come in. As he stepped out into the hallway, Lena could feel the rush of emotions that had built up in her chest slowly begin to settle. The encounter had been unexpected, but it had left her with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For the first time, someone had recognized her for something other than her role at the company. It was strange, but it also felt good. She wasn't just the receptionist. She was a person with a gift, something she had never been brave enough to share. Maybe it was time to start thinking about sharing it after all. The next few days felt different for Lena. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she'd had with Mr. Hayes. The way he'd complimented her music, so genuinely, so sincerely, had stayed with her. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible at work. She didn't feel like just the receptionist who was only noticed when someone needed something. She felt like someone with a purpose beyond her desk. It was hard to shake the feeling. Every time she walked into the office, she noticed the little things more. The way her coworkers smiled at her a bit more warmly. The way the usually cold atmosphere felt just a little bit warmer. She wondered if Mr. Hayes had said something to them. Maybe he'd mentioned her playing, or more likely, had mentioned how much he'd appreciated the music. But then she realized maybe she was just imagining it. It could all just be in her head. Still, the thought lingered. She had never considered her piano playing to be something important. To her, it was simply something she did to escape, a way to get away from the noise of the world. But Mr. Hayes had made it feel like it had value, like it was worth more than just a personal hobby. And that feeling, of being seen for something other than her job, was new and uncomfortable, but also a little exciting. After that night, Lena found herself playing the piano more often. She hadn't planned on it, but after hours when the office was empty and everyone had gone home, the lounge seemed to call to her. She couldn't stop herself. She would sneak away from her desk, and once the door to the lounge clicked shut behind her, it was just her and the keys again. Sometimes, she played the pieces she knew well, classical songs she'd learned over the years, ones she'd played 1,000 times. Other times, she'd let her fingers wander, creating new melodies that were entirely her own. The music always helped her clear her head, especially after long days at the office. But now there was something more. Every time she played, a part of her felt like she was finally expressing something she couldn't put into words. Music had always been her escape, but now it was also her way of telling her story. Despite the encouragement she'd received from Mr. Hayes, Lena wasn't quite ready to share her music with anyone else. The idea of playing in front of people still terrified her. She wasn't sure she could do it. It felt safer to keep it private, to keep it to herself. The thought of performing for a room full of people, even if they were co-workers, made her stomach twist with anxiety. But every time she thought about that night, about Mr. Hayes standing there listening to her play, she couldn't help but feel a little braver. Maybe, just maybe, she could do it. Maybe she could take that step. Let her music be heard by someone other than just herself. But she wasn't sure if she was ready yet. Then on the 5th day after that encounter, something unexpected happened. It was late afternoon, almost time to go home, and the office was beginning to empty out. Lena had finished up her usual tasks, answering a few final calls, checking emails, and organizing her desk for the next day. She was about to slip out of the lobby when she saw Mr. Hayes walking toward her. He was just finishing a conversation with one of the senior managers, and as he turned the corner, his eyes met hers. For a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other across the empty lobby. Lena felt a strange flutter in her chest. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon. The last time they had spoken, it had felt like a quiet, personal moment, one that had been shared between just the two of them. But now here he was, walking toward her as if it was completely normal. "Hey," Mr. Hayes said as he approached. "How's your evening going?" Lena blinked, surprised by the casualness of his greeting. It's going well, thank you," she replied, still unsure of what to say. He smiled, giving her a small nod. "Good. I was just thinking about our last conversation. I'm really glad you're playing the piano again. It's important, you know." He seemed to pause, as if he was considering his words carefully. "I think there's a lot of talent in this office, and we don't always get a chance to share it. But I've been thinking, you should play again. For all of us." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "Play for all of you?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," he said. "I think it would be great. We have our annual company event coming up, and I've been trying to think of ways to make it different, to make it more personal. What do you think? Would you be willing to play at the event?" The idea of performing in front of everyone made Lena's pulse race. She had never imagined herself playing in such a public setting. The thought of standing in front of a crowd, knowing that the entire company would be watching her, made her want to shrink into the floor. It felt like too much, too soon. I don't know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never really performed in front of anyone, especially not a big group. Mr. Hayes looked at her with an encouraging smile. I get it. I know it's a big step, but I really believe you have something special, and I think the team would love to hear it. Lena was silent for a moment, feeling torn. On one hand, the idea of playing for the company seemed like an impossible challenge. She had always kept her music to herself, hidden away in the quiet moments after hours, but on the other hand, Mr. Hayes believed in her. And maybe, just maybe, this could be her chance to show the world who she was outside of her job title. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her head. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice small but filled with a glimmer of hope. I don't know if I'm ready yet, but I'll think about it. Mr. Hayes nodded, clearly pleased with her response. No pressure. I just wanted to offer you the opportunity. Take your time. With that, he gave her a warm smile and walked off toward his office, leaving Lena standing there with a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Her mind was spinning. The idea of playing for the entire company, of stepping into a spotlight she had avoided her whole life, seemed both terrifying and exciting at the same time. For the rest of the evening, Lena couldn't stop thinking about the offer. It lingered in her mind like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. She wasn't sure if she was ready. She wasn't sure if she could handle it. But then a small part of her wondered, what if this was her chance to finally step out of the shadows? What if this was her moment to show everyone who she really was? To stop hiding behind the receptionist desk and let the world hear her music? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Mr. Hayes wasn't asking her to be perfect. He wasn't asking for a flawless performance. He was asking her to share a part of herself, something that had always been hers alone, and give it to the people around her. Maybe it wasn't so scary after all. The next few days after Mr. Hayes' invitation felt like a blur. Lena couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. The idea of playing at the company event kept running through her mind over and over again. She couldn't shake the image of herself standing in front of the entire office, all eyes on her, waiting for her to perform. The thought terrified her, but at the same time there was a part of her that felt a spark of excitement. It was like standing at the edge of something new, something bigger than she had ever imagined. But would she really go through with it? Each night after everyone else had left the office, Lena would sit down at the piano and play as she always did. But now her mind wasn't just on the music. She thought about what Mr. Hayes had said. She thought about the possibility of sharing her music with others. Every time her fingers touched the keys, she wondered if she could really take that step, if she could actually play for a room full of people. But the self-doubt crept in, as it always did. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she messed up in front of everyone? The fear of failing haunted her thoughts. She had spent so much of her life hiding behind the comfort of solitude, the comfort of playing alone in the quiet of the lounge, where no one could judge her. The thought of letting people see that side of her felt like a leap into the unknown. Could she really do it? One evening, after finishing her usual routine, Lena sat at the piano with her hands resting lightly on the keys. She closed her eyes and let out a long breath, trying to calm her nerves. She thought about the possibility of playing at the event. What would it feel like to play in front of everyone? Would she be able to handle the pressure, or would it be too much? As her fingers began to move over the keys, a familiar melody filled the room. It was a piece she had played many times before, one that always brought her comfort. The soft, flowing notes seemed to ease the tension in her chest, helping her relax. For a few moments, she let the music wash over her, allowing her thoughts to drift away. She felt the familiar peace that always came when she played, as if the piano was a safe place where she could be herself, no matter what. But as she continued to play, the thought of the upcoming event returned, lingering in the back of her mind. What if this was the moment she had been waiting for? What if this was her chance to finally show everyone who she was beyond her job? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying at the same time. Could she really let go of her fear and share her music with others? Could she really take that first step towards something bigger than herself? Lena stopped playing for a moment, staring at the keys. Her fingers hovered above them as she wrestled with her thoughts. She knew that if she wanted to take the chance, she would have to be brave. She would have to overcome the fear of being judged, the fear of failure. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe the fear was part of the process. Everyone felt nervous before stepping into something new. Even the most confident people had doubts. It was part of growing, part of pushing past the boundaries she had set for herself. But what if she wasn't ready? What if she tried and it wasn't enough? The question lingered in the air, unanswered. That night, Lena went home feeling uncertain. She couldn't make up her mind. On one hand, the idea of playing at the event felt like a chance to finally be seen, to step out of the shadows. But on the other hand, the fear of not being good enough, of failing, was almost overwhelming. It was easier to stay where she was, to keep playing in the quiet of the lounge where no one could hear her, where no one could judge her. The next day, as she sat at her desk, the idea of the event kept coming back to her. It was all she could think about. She glanced around the office at the busy employees rushing from one meeting to the next, their voices filled with excitement about the upcoming event. Everyone seemed so sure of themselves, so confident. Lena couldn't help but wonder if they ever felt nervous, if they ever questioned themselves the way she did. It seemed like they had everything figured out. They knew who they were. They knew what they wanted, but Lena didn't feel that way. She felt like she was still figuring it out. She wasn't sure if she had what it took to be noticed, to be seen for something other than her role at the front desk. At lunch, she went to the nearby cafe, sitting alone at a small table by the window. She absent-mindedly stirred her coffee, lost in thought. The sound of the city outside, the bustling traffic, the chatter of people passing by seemed distant to her. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the same question that had been haunting her for days. Should she do it? Should she play at the event? As she sat there, she couldn't help but replay Mr. Hayes's words in her mind. He had believed in her. He had seen something in her music that she hadn't even fully recognized in herself. He had trusted her to share it with the company, to show them what she was capable of. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being flawless or having everything figured out. It was about taking a chance, stepping out of her comfort zone and allowing herself to be vulnerable. It was about letting the music speak for itself. That was when she made a decision. The next day, as Lena sat at her desk, she noticed Mr. Hayes walking by, heading toward the elevator. Her heart began to race. Without thinking too much, she stood up quickly and walked over to him, trying to calm the nerves that were starting to bubble up in her chest. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice a little shaky, "I've been thinking about your offer and I think I'd like to play at the event." He stopped, turning to face her with a surprised but pleased expression. "Really, that's great to hear." Lena nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "I'm still nervous about it, but I think I want to try. I want to share my music with everyone." Mr. Hayes smiled warmly. "I'm really glad to hear that. I know it won't be easy, but I'm sure you'll do amazing. Take your time with it, though. There's no rush." Lena's nerves didn't disappear completely, but hearing his words of encouragement made her feel a little lighter. Maybe she wasn't ready, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it didn't matter if she was nervous. She could still try. And that was enough. As she returned to her desk, she felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, moments when doubt crept in, but at least now she knew that she was ready to take that first step. She was ready to face the fear head-on and see where it took her. And for the first time in a long while, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in a while. Hope. The day of the event arrived quicker than Lena had anticipated. The week leading up to it had been a blur. She had practiced every evening after work, her fingers gliding over the piano keys as she tried to calm her nerves. She still wasn't entirely sure if she was ready, but every note she played gave her a small sense of reassurance. Little by little, the fear began to feel more manageable. But deep inside, the nerves were still there, just waiting to surface. The morning of the event, Lena woke up earlier than usual. She stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, staring at her reflection. The usual nervous thoughts started to creep in. What if I mess up? What if they don't like my playing? What if it's embarrassing? She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She had made a decision. She had already told Mr. Hayes that she would play, and now it was time to follow through. She had to trust herself. After a quick breakfast, Lena dressed in something comfortable but still professional, settling on a simple black dress. It wasn't too fancy, but it felt right. Something that would let her focus on the music and not on her outfit. When she arrived at the office, the building was already buzzing with activity. People were running around, setting up the event space, checking last-minute details, and making sure everything was in place. Lena's heart was pounding, but she kept telling herself that everything would be okay. As the day went on, the office slowly transformed into a space filled with lights, decorations, and a sense of anticipation. The usual calm of the workplace was replaced by the excitement of the event. But in the back of her mind, Lena couldn't shake the feeling of dread. What if something went wrong? What if she wasn't good enough? The thoughts kept circling, but she tried not to let them take over. By the time the event officially began, the office was packed. Employees from different departments mingled in the open space, chatting and laughing. Some were gathered around the food tables. Others were admiring the decorations. The energy in the room was electric, and Lena could feel it too, despite her nerves. She had never been in a room full of so many people at once. She had always stayed in the background, quietly going about her work without drawing attention to herself. But today was different. Mr. Hayes found her just before the event began, his calm demeanor giving her a sense of relief. He smiled warmly as he approached. "You ready?" he asked, his voice steady, reassuring. Lena nodded, but her stomach was still in knots. "I think so. I'm nervous, though," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "It's normal," he said, giving her a gentle smile. "But remember, you're not here to impress anyone. You're just here to share something that's meaningful to you. People will appreciate it for what it is. You've got this." Lena took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She nodded again, feeling a little better. Mr. Hayes patted her on the shoulder before walking away to mingle with the other guests. Soon, it was time. The spotlight was on her. There in the center of the room was the piano, shiny and grand, waiting for her to sit down and play. The crowd had gathered in a circle, their murmurs dying down as they turned their attention toward her. It was all happening so quickly. Lena swallowed hard and walked toward the piano. Her hands shook slightly as she sat down on the bench. She took a deep breath, her palms resting lightly on the keys. For a brief moment, everything around her seemed to disappear. The chatter, the crowd, the buzz of the event. It was just her and the piano. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the music rise up inside her. She didn't have to worry about perfection. She didn't have to worry about impressing anyone. She was there to share a part of herself, and that was all that mattered. Lena began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, but they quickly flowed into something more. As her fingers moved across the keys, she felt herself letting go, feeling the music in a way she hadn't in a long time. It wasn't just about playing the right notes. It was about expressing the emotions that had always been bottled up inside her. It was about giving the music life, letting it speak for her. The crowd was silent as they listened. Lena's heart beat faster, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was because she felt something she had never felt before. She was connected to the moment. She was no longer just the shy receptionist. In that moment, she was the musician, the artist, the one telling a story through sound. As the song progressed, Lena's confidence began to grow. She no longer worried about making a mistake. She simply let herself be carried away by the music. She played with more freedom, her hands moving smoothly across the keys as she lost herself in the melody. The audience remained quiet, but she could feel their attention, their respect for what she was doing. They were listening. They were truly listening. When the last note finally echoed in the room, Lena sat there for a moment, her hands resting on the keys. A silence hung in the air, thick with anticipation. Then slowly, the room erupted into applause. It was a soft, respectful clap at first, but soon it grew louder. The warmth of their appreciation washed over her, and for the first time that night, Lena allowed herself to smile. She had done it. She had played in front of a room full of people, and it had felt right. She had shared something that mattered to her, and they had embraced it. Mr. Hayes was the first to step forward, clapping with a proud look on his face. "That was amazing," he said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "You were incredible." Lena smiled, a little shy but feeling a rush of pride. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "I was really nervous." "That's normal," he said with a grin. "But you did it, and you did it beautifully." The other employees began to gather around her, offering their congratulations. They were kind, thoughtful, and genuinely impressed by her performance. For the first time in a long time, Lena didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like a part of something bigger. Like her music had given her a new way to connect with the people around her. They weren't just co-workers anymore. They had seen a side of her that had always been hidden, and they respected it. They respected her. As the evening went on, Lena mingled with the others, feeling more at ease. The fear that had been so overwhelming earlier had faded, replaced by a sense of fulfillment. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, and not only had she survived, but she had thrived. She had shared her passion with others, and it had made a difference. Later that night, as the event wound down and the last few people began to leave, Mr. Hayes found Lena again. "You were incredible tonight," he said, his tone filled with genuine pride. Lena smiled, her heart still racing from the experience. "Thank you," she said, feeling a sense of accomplishment she hadn't expected. "You know," he continued, "I'm really glad you decided to do this. I think you've got something special, and I hope you don't stop sharing it." Lena nodded. "I won't. I think I'm just getting started." As the last of the guests left the building, Lena stood by the piano, taking a moment to soak it all in. She had done it. She had faced her fear, stepped into the unknown, and come out stronger on the other side. The shy receptionist who had once hidden behind her desk was no more. Tonight she had shown the world who she really was, and it had felt incredible. And as she left the office that night, the sound of her music still echoing in her mind, Lena knew that this was just the beginning. She wasn't done yet. She had a new sense of purpose now, and she was ready to take on whatever came next.